I'm Ian Wood. This is my video CV. It's a quick jaunt through some of my broadcasting work over the past 10 years, television and radio. Now, for the radio clips, I turn to my state-of-the-art digital Dolby with Project surround sound stereo radio receiver. I'm Ian Wood with LBC Crown FM News for London. The former Conservative Minister, Mr Michael Heseltine, has called for a major overhaul of the poll tax. In an article in The Times, Mr Heseltine clearly warns that if the changes aren't made, his party will lose the next election. When you start out in television, you cherish every brief glimpse that the box affords you. Even when you're made to look as if you're 3 inches high and playing golf on some bloke's shoulder pad, serving yourself food you hate on a programme about your girlfriend's dietary habits, fiddling with your Radio 5 live equipment while a camera crew from Everyman looks on, or being canvassed your views on the Notting Hill Carnival when you've got a splitting headache.
It's an all-round visual experience and an aural one as well. Pardon?
Sometimes, given the benefit of hindsight, a brief glimpse is preferable. It's funny how the Jerry Adams look never really caught on.
Right, I think this is what they call the hard part, the uphill part of this 1 kilometre circuit. Are we at roughly the halfway mark now?
It is about roughly the halfway mark, yes.
One thing I
We're
noticed...
just about to get through the hard bit.
Oh, this is it. And it's really tough on the legs. This is something I didn't quite expect. I thought it might be a bit tough around where the harness is in contact with the body. But fortunately, I've got this unerring ability to dress correctly for the occasion.
I noticed.
And Julie, you're behind all this, so how on earth did all this occur to you? Was it in a bad dream or what?
No, it just, we were in a social club committee one day and we just said, what are we going to do for comic relief?
Had you been drinking by any chance?
In Liverpool, I heard a presenter on Radio City engage comedian Jack Dee in a battle of wits. Mr Dee responded by destroying him on air. Interviewing the likes of Jack Dee can be a bit of a minefield, but it is possible.
You've gone into at least 2 professions, it struck me, that seem designed to test the patience of a saint, comedy. And I know that before that, you were in the restaurant trade. Why on earth do you do that? Is it some masochistic streak?
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, a lot of people think that you go into catering because you want to serve people, and it's actually not true at all. I think most people go into catering because they have a grudge to bear. I was certainly one of those kind of people and used it as sort of cathartic exercise. I got a lot off my chest when I was working in restaurants.
This is basically having a go at people who prior to going into your restaurant, had never met you before, but in that short time they were there, had riled you enough to want to have a go back at them.
Well, you have to remember, Ian, it was in the 1980s when there was the kind of restaurant I was working in was full of sort of yuppies who were about 14 years old and earning so much money they didn't know what to do with it, and they'd all park their Porsches and go-karts outside and then come in and spend ludicrous amounts of money. And this is very much a time when it was quite fashionable to be insulted by the waiter. And so I got known as the rude waiter, and then they'd say, would it be possible to have that really rude waiter you've got? I think his name's Jack.
Civic leaders nurtured high hopes that hosting the Eurovision Song Contest would put Birmingham on the map. Leaving aside the fact that cartographers have been putting Birmingham on maps for centuries, when the Euro Circus came to town, you couldn't move for commentators, eager to have their say on the cultural impact it would bring and how Camp Irony had renewed interest in this rather odd festival. But it was only here at Central Television that Radhika Sucharan was able to flush out one so-called Euro expert to ask what no one else dared ask. Eurovision, what's the point? 2 reasons. Firstly, Europe was still rather battle-scarred following World War II, and so the idea was to unite a shattered continent through the power of music, and that was the lofty ideal. But it had a more practical aim as well, and that was to enable technicians to push forward the boundaries in terms of international telecommunications, because back in the 50s, that was still a very tricky area. So I think they've managed to succeed in that area, but in terms of uniting Europe through the power of music, I think they've rather fallen short, because there is more pettiness, bitchiness and backbiting through Eurovision than there probably is through negotiations for the single currency.
Sounds just like the media industry to me, but in terms of for a performer, really, is it the kiss of death or can it lead to bigger things?
If you're British and you're an up-and-coming act and you don't win, yes, it is the kiss of death. I mean, history has shown that. I mean, you can list off any number of names who've competed for the United Kingdom and have never been heard of again. Coco, Bardo, Ricky, First Report, they all had their moment of glory in Eurovision, failed to win, and were never heard of again. Bucks Fizz are the obvious exception because they played it absolutely right.
And they ripped the skirt off.
They ripped the skirt off.
That was the memorable bit for me. I can't even remember the song.
But remember, Radhika, we're supposed to be judging the song and not the performance.
But do they?
No. The kind of knowledge I tend to keep to myself, especially when I'm joined by friends at Manic Street Preachers gigs. But a little knowledge of a lot of music came in useful for this opinion piece for Radio Scotland. I had a listen at the way non-Scots took traditional Scottish music, stripped it of its tartan trim and sent it back home a very different animal, in a sort of gleeful revenge for Andy Stewart.
Bootsman, there's a moose loose about this house.
Lord Rockingham's 11, a short-lived byproduct of Oh Boy, ITV's rock and roll show from the 50s. A more exotic clash of cultures was the result of French disco ensemble Voyage lashing the skirl of the bagpipes to the European disco beat of the 1970s. In 1974, Birmingham musician Roy Wood used his genius for instrumentation to prove that any old tempo could be used to corrupt the purity of the pipes. So now we know Scotland and reggae go together like Drambuie and lilt.
That was my showreel. Thanks for watching. Now I'm off to listen to some hardcore junglist fat tunes in the area, just as soon as I can find a gramophone on which to play them. See ya.